Welcome back to Playing with 11 Men. Utter woke nonsense. You know, it's funny being in my position sometimes. I'm analysing a thing that I have never done professionally by people I've never met, with mostly surface level, publicly available information, discussing concepts I've never formally studied while aware that there are much greater and higher levels than I could ever understand about them, and expecting to be taken seriously. And in this video, I'm going to be telling someone who has done all of that how to do his job. Imagine doing that in any other context. That is mental. But that's the joy of football discourse and discussion. The fact you can go to your first or your 500th match with a pro license or barely sure on which team is which and have a spirited, authentic conversation on the way home or on the terraces about why things did or didn't work out. And on some level, you might be right. Because football is this weird, amorphous thing. Sometimes you need to create more faux transitions to exploit the half spaces by baiting the opposition's spare runner, to press your libero and your in-possession structure with more rhythm in your sequence. And sometimes you need to try a bit harder or put someone else on the pitch. And both can be right at the same time. So with all that in mind, how do we actually analyse football, and Arsenal in our case, well? How can we come to a reasonable conclusion about the goings-on right now and provide a fair assessment of where Arsenal are at any given point, given how little we know, but how right we might be? Well, first, we don't start by ignoring the facts. I'm recording before the Shakhtar game for scheduling reasons, but as of recording, Arsenal have lost one competitive game since April the 17th, 2024. One. Just for comparison, City have lost two, one on the same day, and the other was the FA Cup final, and Liverpool have lost two. The Merseyside derby under Klopp, and against Forest under Slot. Since our loss to Fulham in December of 2023, we've had two league losses in coming up to a year. One of which we played 60 minutes 10v11 in the other day, and the other of which we played in the middle of a Champions League doubleheader against Bayern Munich. After game week 8, according to Mark's Stats Club, 11v11, we still had the best XG for and against in the whole Premier League, despite, as we know, the difficult start to the season. The next closest are Liverpool, and I'd ask you to look at their fixture list compared to ours to contextualise that. Maybe we've lost 15-0 to Shakhtar and I just don't know it yet, but even if we have, it's still pretty good reading. Not everything is sunshine and Bukayo Saka, but if you're sat there as a fan after our first league loss since April, thinking that the title race is over, as I've seen some people say, and in the next breath or the next sentence would question the players' resilience and mentality and can't see the irony, you might need to give your head a wobble. However, as I said in my previous video, I think we had a brilliantly underrated opening 7 games, but last Saturday afternoon was not good enough from the players or Mikel. It simply wasn't. I felt the lineup was far too conservative, and while Bournemouth were admirably willing to push up and stop us building out, dealing with our option to go long really well, I felt they left gaps we could have exploited by being a bit braver between the lines. Can Raya clip a ball in here, say, and we go straight through them? I felt we lacked a connector in the centre with Trossard out wide, and we'll come to that a little bit later. A look at the running XG data tells a story. 30 minutes go by, and I didn't feel we imposed ourselves on the game at all. When 9 of your players are over 6 foot, that's a problem. Clearly, players will impose themselves in different ways, but the ultra-conservative midfield 3 of Partey, Rice and Marino meant there was a real lack of penetration inside. And then, when Saliba was sent off, we didn't react. Even if, I'm sure, knowing Mikel, the instructions were clear, what was translating onto the pitch wasn't. But it's not worth dwelling for too long on the footballing lessons of a game with no Saka, no Martinelli from the start, no Timber, no Ødegaard, and where our best defender gets sent off 30 minutes in. We're one of the best prepared teams in world football, but managers are allowed to have bad days, and Mikel had one. If you want to draw wild conclusions about last Saturday and project off into the distance, be my guest. But that's not what we do here. So while it wasn't good enough, we need to be clear what conclusions we can draw. What can we unpack and fairly extrapolate from last Saturday afternoon? I asked you guys on X to tell me the biggest thing holding us back right now from winning the league, and the response was really interesting. I'm generalising, but there were 3 main takeaways: the refs, City, and Mikel's shortcomings. So let's come to all 3. First, the refs. As you all know, I don't happen to think there is an evil conspiracy against Arsenal orchestrated by some sort of crime syndicate at PGMOL, but I do think there's a deep level of inconsistency that is harming us and other teams in the league. There'll be flashpoints for every team across the season, even if we don't notice them, and we're going through one right now. Now, there will be inconsistency in refereeing because ultimately a lot of it is subjective, but you can do as much as possible to reduce the level of subjectivity, in my view. And this is my criticism of PGMOL, which I hope the club take up with them. Howard Webb, the chief refereeing officer of the PGMOL, was recently on the overlap. Head to about 21 minutes in, and you'll hear him explaining the delaying the restart rule. He says that referees are told that to penalise for delaying the restart, situations need to be, quote, clear, deliberate, and impactful. Okay, that's a bit subjective, but I suppose even if you put in a blanket rule, there would always be some subjectivity. But this next bit doesn't have to be. I'm paraphrasing here because it's a long clip, so go watch it. But he then goes on to use an example of Szoboszlai and Trossard to illustrate his point, and basically says that game state is the reason that Trossard got a yellow for delaying the restart against City, and Szoboszlai didn't against Forest. I.e., Trossard delayed the restart when Arsenal were winning, so it's an unfair advantage, and Szoboszlai did it when Liverpool were losing, so it's not, and therefore it's not penalised. That is mental. So it's about game state. What next? It's not a red card because you were winning? It's not a goal because you had less than 40% possession? Your manager's wearing brogues so you get 3 points docked? Like, what? There will always be subjectivity and inconsistency in refereeing, but here's an example where you can reduce it down. Simply put, this rule needs changing as soon as possible. If you delay the restart by kicking or throwing the ball away or in any other manner, no matter the circumstance of the game, you should get a yellow. There will still be subjectivity, but the game state part of the subjectivity can't be there. Because, for example, who decides if kicking a ball away is an advantage or not? As AFC James put it, say you're Southampton playing City and want to hold on to an unexpected draw and you kick the ball away. Is that an advantage? You're Southampton, so maybe yes, but you're drawing, so maybe no. That leap that some people make from that's a terrible rule and it's inconsistent and it's affected us, which is where I am, to there is evil goblins after Arsenal at the PGMOL, is where I get off the boat. But in terms of the overall picture, we do need to have a look at this. I would encourage us to press this to the PGMOL, but also be more cautious moving forward. Wherever you sit on this, whether you think they're out to get us or not, this is the hand we're dealt. So let's fight the injustice where we can see it, not where we have to go looking. Over the course of the season, as it always does, it will begin to even out. Scott Willis kept account of it last season, and it came out at about 50-50, and I'm pretty sure it will again this season. The next big category was Man City. Look, Man City set incredibly high standards, but they're not infallible. Not this year anyway. They've conceded a really high number of their goals in transition moments. They're jumping around. Fulham have better XG numbers. Haaland hasn't scored for a month. Okay, I'm clutching at straws a bit there. We know what they are as an attacking force, but they've definitely lost something with Rodri. And something's coming for them with those investigations and the first findings that we expect to hear in the new year. But again, regardless of where you think City are, we know we can beat them now. For me, City directly aren't holding us back. And I think we saw in the fallout of the recent game just how rattled they are. We took 4 points off them last season and should do again this year, in my opinion. Man City indirectly might win the league, but we can beat them directly. So our issues come against other teams, in my view, and that's where I want to focus. The teams that, theoretically, we should be beating. City's major impact is making the water we swim in feel the way it does. One loss and it's all over. But I think there is room for optimism. And finally, Mikel himself. And this, although there's many levels to this, is the one where I think there could be some room for growth to guarantee us that title at the end of the season. Mikel can and does get things wrong, but I know he'll learn from the Bournemouth loss. He always does. Whether it's the Bayern loss, looking at the spaces they gave Gabriel and the purchase of Calafiori, or the City loss in 22-23 and his comments about it since, he'll learn. It's one of his biggest strengths, one we aren't privy to many of the details of, but can deduce from his actions. He's incredibly self-reflective, almost never deflecting responsibility away from himself, or at least including himself. But I've said in previous videos that I'm pretty sure Mikel will almost always defer to seniority and experience. But I don't think that's always exactly what we need. And I think we saw it hurting us on Saturday. We will never know how that game might have played out another day. Maybe the plan was to bring on Enquiries or Jesus, our only chaos players on the bench really, get them on in the second half to play with some spaces we felt might open up later on, but you can't let any time go to waste in a Premier League game. And the problem was clear from the off, and I worry that will hurt us again. Arsenal lacked a connector and a reference. every time we got forward past the halfway line, we didn't have someone brave enough to receive between the lines, turn and carry, and get Bournemouth players running backwards. We didn't have someone with the exuberance to say, okay, I'm going to take you on. Facilitators, great technicians, sure, but not that. That was a game that was crying out for Nwaneri. I just don't think Mikel likes gambling. Early subs, eyebrow-raising lineup picks, surprising positional switches. Mikel just doesn't do it that much. Little tweaks, yes, but rarely anything big. And to win the biggest prizes, you might have to take the biggest gambles. Young players give you new qualities, yes, but they also give you fearlessness. They give you energy, desire to impress, desire to cement themselves, make a name. That needs to mature, and it will mature. But it's also exactly what you need in your squad at certain points in a season. Almost every title-winning team or era, if you notice, has a young player or group of young players making their name in the game while they win. A young player who injects something vital with their talent, fearlessness, and energy. Maybe that young player doesn't go on to have the superstar career everyone expects, but they play their part. Rico Lewis and Oscar Bob recently, Foden in Pep's earlier years, Trent in that era, going back, Rooney, Ronaldo, even lesser-known names, the Solankis, the Chilwells of the world, and so on. I'm not saying those guys won the title for their team. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. The point is they were part of a balanced squad. Youth and experience. But it's not about the age. It's about the unpredictability and chaos that a young player can bring. Arteta will do it occasionally, but Nwaneri came on at 2-0 down after the penalty. What's he supposed to do in that time frame? He looked great, lively, buzzing around, but it's not enough time. And at this point, it isn't about trust, I don't think. You can't tell me Mikel doesn't trust Nwaneri, the guy he made the youngest ever Premier League player, the guy he trusted to see the game out against Spurs, to change the game at 2-2 against Leicester, the guy he gave a key role to against Bolton in the EFL Cup a few weeks ago, the guy who's been training with the first team since he was about 4. And you can't tell me it's a talent issue either. It just isn't. This isn't the first time we're feeling Mikel's conservatism, whether it's back in 2020, his persistence with the El Nenis and Holdings of the world, or in lineup selections to this day. But now we have a ready-made answer, staring us in the face, ready to play. Mikel's spoken in the past about not wanting to rush young players' development. He says he feels a great deal of responsibility for that. He's been around the game. He's seen players rise up and fall down. We look back on Wenger's legacy and laud the successes of certain young players, but maybe forget the Ignacy Mikels, the Sanchez Watts of the world. And I think Mikel is very aware of those guys. But there's a shade of grey here. Earlier, I said this is something to guarantee a title win. And I said that because I'm pretty sure we're going to win it anyway. In the grand scheme of things, being a bit deferential to what you know and senior players and being a little bit conservative isn't going to change, 10 results or 15 results over the course of the season. But it might change a few moments in a season. And in a game of such tight margins, he might need to loosen the grip just a bit. Mikel will have his reasons. Reasons, I'm sure, that are well thought out and way above my head. There's things I don't know. There's levels to this game we don't understand. But sometimes the obvious answer is also the right one. The guy at his first ever game still knows a bad miss when he sees one. To guarantee the title, Mikel might have to take more risks. I just hope it doesn't hurt us if he doesn't. If you like The Different Knock, you can support us on Patreon monthly, or you can buy us a coffee.